America may have just made another strategic mistake. And this time, the biggest winner might not be Iran. It might be China. Just when Washington expected a breakthrough with Tehran, Iran suddenly canceled a highly anticipated meeting in Switzerland. A deal that appeared close to completion collapsed at the very last moment. For many observers, the immediate question was simple. Why did Iran walk away? But the more important question is this. Why did Iran feel confident enough to say no? Because today, Iran believes time is on its side. And America appears to be running out of it. For decades, the United States was the power that set the terms. Countries came to Washington seeking agreements. America held the leverage. America controlled the pressure. America dictated the timetable. But recent events suggest that reality may be changing. The cancelled US-Iran talks are just the latest example. According to reports, both sides had been preparing for an important diplomatic meeting aimed at reducing tensions in the Middle East. Expectations were high. Many analysts believed the talks could lead to a significant agreement. Then, everything changed. Just one day before the meeting, Iran's supreme leader issued a public statement that effectively redrew the rules. The message was straightforward. Negotiations can happen, but promises must be honored first. Iran would not move forward simply because Washington wanted progress. In other words, Tehran was no longer willing to trust words alone. And from Iran's perspective, there is a reason for that. Over the past 2 decades, Iranian leaders have repeatedly watched agreements collapse, sanctions return, and political commitments disappear. Whether one agrees with Tehran or not, Iranian policymakers clearly believe they have learned a lesson. Trust is no longer enough. Results come first. Then came another development. While diplomatic discussions were ongoing, military operations involving Israel and Lebanon continued. For Iran, this created a serious problem. How could Tehran justify moving closer to an agreement if events on the ground appeared to be moving in the opposite direction? The answer was simple. Couldn't. So Iran delayed. Then Iran canceled. And suddenly, Washington found itself facing an uncomfortable reality. The United States wanted a deal, but it couldn't guarantee the conditions needed to make that deal happen. This exposed a deeper problem. America's influence in the Middle East is still enormous, but its ability to control outcomes is becoming less certain. Washington wants regional stability, yet many of its partners have their own priorities. Washington wants diplomatic progress. Others are focused on military objectives. The result is a growing gap between American strategy and regional realities. And that gap is becoming increasingly difficult to manage. But the story becomes even more interesting when we zoom out. Because this isn't really just about Iran. It's about America's broader position in the world. The United States is currently dealing with challenges on multiple fronts. The war in Ukraine continues. Competition in the Indo-Pacific is intensifying. National debt continues to grow. Political polarization remains severe. At the same time, Washington is still deeply involved in Middle Eastern affairs. That's a lot of pressure for any superpower. And Iran knows it. In negotiations, the side under greater pressure often has less leverage. Tehran appears to understand that America wants stability more than ever, which is exactly why Iran believes it can afford to wait. But if Iran is gaining leverage, who is gaining the most from this situation? Many would argue the answer is China, because every additional year that America spends managing crises in the Middle East creates opportunities elsewhere. First, there is energy. China remains one of the world's largest energy importers. A stable Middle East is important for China's long-term economic growth. But unlike the United States, China generally does not carry the same security burden in the region. America spends resources maintaining military commitments. China focuses on trade, infrastructure, and economic partnerships. One side pays for security. The other side expands commercial influence. Those are very different strategies. Second, there is diplomacy. Over the last decade, China's relationships across the Middle East have expanded significantly. Countries that were once firmly aligned with one side or another are increasingly willing to work with Beijing. Why? Because many regional governments see China primarily as an economic partner. Ports, railways, technology, energy projects, investment. Whether this perception is entirely accurate is another debate. But it is clearly becoming a powerful factor in regional politics. And then there is the most important advantage of all: time. History often rewards the countries that avoid strategic distractions. The United States spent 20 years in Afghanistan. During that same period, China became the world's second-largest economy. America invested enormous resources in Iraq. Meanwhile, China strengthened its manufacturing base and expanded its global trade networks. Today, Washington is still struggling to reduce its commitments in the Middle East. China, meanwhile, continues investing in technology, industrial upgrading, and long-term economic development. From Beijing's perspective, every year that America remains strategically overstretched is another year of opportunity. This is why the cancelled US-Iran talks matter. Not because a single meeting failed, but because they reveal a much larger shift. The Middle East is changing. Regional powers are becoming more independent. Countries are increasingly willing to pursue their own interests rather than simply follow Washington's preferences. And as this happens, America's ability to shape events unilaterally becomes more limited. China doesn't need to dominate the Middle East to benefit from this trend. It simply needs to remain engaged, patient, and economically relevant. Perhaps that is the biggest irony of all. For decades, the United States invested enormous resources trying to shape the Middle East. Yet many of those efforts ultimately became expensive strategic burdens. China, by contrast, largely avoided direct military involvement. And today, it finds itself expanding influence across a region where America has spent trillions of dollars. Whether this trend continues remains to be seen. But one thing is becoming increasingly clear. The future may not belong to the country that wins the most wars. It may belong to the country that avoids getting trapped in them. And right now, that lesson appears far more useful to China than it does to the United States.